was actually a beautiful day in a beach community, and I was in the middle of a phone call, and then I see a pickup truck pull in behind the phone booths, and he gets out and he goes on the last one. I can immediately smell alcohol in his breath. As he came in, I tried hitting him with the baton again. He reaches in and he puts both hands on my gun and starts to pull my gun out. This one I knew this guy was for real, especially twice he could have gotten away and didn't, and now he's pulling on my gun. This guy wanted me dead, and I knew that. And I thought, if that gun comes out of the holster, he's been stronger than me so far. And so I remember thinking, please, God, don't let the gun come out.
There's really no way to explain to someone what that feels like when someone is trying to take your weapon and you know in your mind they're trying to take your life.
The nurse walks out and she stared right at me. I'll never forget. She looked at me and she goes, well, he's dead. You know, like blaming me. I mean, it was me that shot, but acting
Right.
like I murdered him. I hear a muffled pop. It's New Year's Eve. We've been hearing them all night long. It sounded like it came from the next yard. It didn't even sound like it came from anywhere near us. And I just figured it was a firecracker, for the night. I take 2 more steps. I look in the cab of the truck and I see the barrel of an Uzi. One of the worst things ever is they read me Miranda.
Hello, America. Welcome to your Leo Nation, where we believe in and support the rule of law. We are very honored today to have a very special guest. I told you our last show that we know it's election season, and we were talking about where law enforcement starts, the chief executive officer, the commander-in-chief, the president. So these elections are important, and we're going to stay on that as we get closer to November. But I did tell you that we were going to have a couple of very special shows in addition to the politics. And today is one of those special shows. I want to welcome former retired Assistant Chief California Highway Patrol Brian Smith. Brian, it's great to have you on.
Hey, good to see you again, Mark.
It's great to see you. Actually, you're right. We haven't seen each other for a number of years. We actually worked in the same division for a while when you were a captain, and I think at the time I was a sergeant, um, a different command, but we were in the same division. And I know post-retirement, CHP, you've moved on. You are in management for another law enforcement agency today. So you're continuing your long service. I mean, your career started, my gosh, I mean, almost 40 years ago in law enforcement. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, it's kind of scary, man. It went by fast.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I only did 30 and it went by like grease lightning. And but I know you and I know your dedication to law enforcement. I know your dedication to and the love of the California Highway Patrol. I'm sure you have the same feelings for where you're working now. And I'm glad you're still in the law enforcement profession because we need people like you, Brian. We talk about leadership here on this program a lot. And you are a person that has always exhibited leadership. And with that comes comes bumps and bruises because leadership almost by definition means you're going to swim upstream sometimes. And we'll talk about that near the end of the show about some changes that your leadership, you specifically brought to the California Highway Patrol in relation to the incidents we're going to discuss today. And those incidents they are officer involved shootings. And, for people who may not be in law enforcement or be really familiar with, you know, numbers, the stats in law enforcement, for an officer ever to be involved in a shooting, on duty shooting, it's a fairly rare thing when you look at the almost 1 million officers across the country, and really how rare that any single officer is involved in a shooting. And then beyond that, how rare it is for an officer to be part of a deadly on duty shooting. And here we have you, someone who was involved in shootings, and both of them were fatal shootings. And I remembered a little bit about each of the shootings, but just a couple of days ago, we were talking, and you refreshed my memory about some of the details, and it's kind of blood curdling. Quite honestly, I think any shooting would be. I think some maybe more than others. So with that said, Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I just want the audience to sit back, listen, and really try to appreciate when you hear about an officer, being involved in a shooting, wherever it is, whatever city, whatever state, whatever town, because we get so much instant media now, instant reporting, individual publishing, videos are every place. I think and I understand it, but it's taken for granted how impactful these are and how terrifying they can be for the officer. What impact it can have emotionally and what the process is. People don't see it. All they see is the very glamorous stuff, for lack of a better word, the high profile aspects of these things, but they have no idea what's behind the scenes when it comes to investigations and process and reviews and the criminal aspect of it. So, with that said, I'd like to turn it over to you, and you can give a little bit, about yourself, Brian. I think I've given, a good part of your bio, but after that, we'll get into these two shootings.
Mark, just to touch on what you just said about, most people go their whole career and never get in a shooting. And I remember after my first shooting and getting ready to go back to work, I was only off for a couple days and went right back to work. And everybody told me, don't worry, most people don't get in any shootings. You've already had your shooting, don't worry about it. And then I got in another fatal shooting. And the reason I bring that up, Mark, is because for the officers that are working out there, if somebody says, hey, you're never going to get another one, for your officer's safety's sake, but that's not true. And I know there's officers that are watching this today that have been in probably more than two shootings, and they'll tell you the same thing. You just have to be prepared every day. You just have to know, and not to get complacent. Keep your eyes on their hands and what they're doing and the other people that are involved. Because if you get the attitude, and there are some officers that have never been in a shooting have the same attitude of, hey, it's not going to happen to me. And I'll tell you, I was ready for whatever I had to do, but in the back of my mind, I didn't think I was ever going to be in a shooting. I think when you're young, also, you also think, you read about the shootings, you see the shootings, and you think, wow, that's cool, right? Because it's an exciting part of TV and all that. And you find out, boy, you shoot somebody, or you're shooting because you are, it's either you or them, or somebody else in them, and you have to make that decision. And it's a tough decision, and after you make it, you find it's not, it's not easy to go through. um, and so that's a point I wanted to get across as well, that and I'll tell you, for the public, not just for the law enforcement but the regular public, I can tell you officers do not want to be in a shooting. And if you
Mhm.
review most shootings, we almost wait too long. They've done those things with the FOTS machines where it's simulated, and they got people that were against anti-law enforcement, anti all this, and they put them in the same test, and they were shooting up, you know, too soon and all that. So it's very difficult, because when you pull that trigger, it's not just about pulling the trigger. You know that you can take somebody's life, but when you're pulling that trigger, it's because you are at the point where you don't have any other options. So I just wanted to start off with that.
Well, Brian, I'm glad you did, and you really nailed home the point. The fact is that very few officers statistically are involved in shootings. I went 30 years in my career, about 15 of those in the field, um, and drew my weapon a number of times. Probably half a dozen times I thought that I was going to have
Sure,
to fire
sure,
the weapon, and thank God it didn't happen. I certainly, like as you said, I certainly was one of those officers, like most, who did not ever want to have to use their firearm on duty, certainly not take another life. But we are sworn to do certain things when you take that oath. And certainly when not only defending yourself, but defending your partner officer and defending the public. And these are things that we can't shy away from if that time comes. And again, that time came for you twice. Um, so let's go back in time. In 1986 was the first shooting, and just to set the stage a little bit, there are times in the Highway Patrol, and I say times, different shifts depending on where you work, that you either ride solo or you ride with a partner. And in this case, Brian, let you take it from here. You were riding solo on this day in 1986 when this first shooting occurred. Is that correct?
correct.
No, let's take it from there and tell the audience what happened.
So it was actually a beautiful day in a beach community. And it was just in the afternoon. I got notified by dispatch that I had a phone call. Somebody was requesting a phone call. We didn't have cell phones then, so I stopped. I was working in a patrol car, and I stopped at the old phones where you have three in a row, and they're the outside ones. You just walk up and drop the coins in and call. I was on the first one, and I was in the middle of a phone call, and then I see a pickup truck pull in behind the phone booths, or not booths, but the phones, and he gets out and he goes on the last one, and I can immediately smell alcohol in his breath. And he dialed, and then he just stood on the phone, holding the phone up to his face, staring at me, like staring me down. And I guess they didn't answer because he hung up the phone, and he looked at me again, got in his truck, and then took off really fast. And instead of going out the exit driveway, he bottomed out on the curb and scraped all the way out. And then instead of just leaving, he pulls in front of me where I'm on the phone, and he kind of leans down and looks at me like, "What are you going to do about it?" And so I waved to him, "Hey, come over here." And he floors it. And so I said, "Gotta go." Hung up the phone and jumped in a patrol car, and I went after him. I just light him up. Well, now he's going in, weaving in and out of traffic and trying to get away from me, and hit the siren a couple times. He goes a couple blocks over the freeway, and then he pulls into a gas station. Finally stops, and I walk up and I said, "Did you see me?" He goes, "Yeah, I saw you." I go, "Why didn't you stop then?" He goes, "Because I didn't want to." Okay. So I said, "You have your license and registration?" And he looks, and he didn't have his license. And so he reaches into the glove box and pulls out an envelope, and it has a name on it. And he points to it and he goes, "That's me." Like I should know who he is. And I didn't know who he was. So I said, "How much have you had to drink?" And I'm sure he said, like everybody else, 2 beers, right? So I get him out, and uh, I give him field sobriety tests, and he just bombs them. Right? He's really had too much to drink. And then on the second attempt, he just looks at me and says, "F this," and starts running. So I put out on my radio, I'm in foot pursuit. I yell from the stop, and then I'm running after him, and he's wearing a t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers, and I'm wearing my vest, boots, full gear. And so I run after him, tell him to stop. He turns around to punch me, and he knocks the radio to the ground. So I don't have my radio. And I catch up just as I'm about to catch up to him. I grab his t-shirt, and it rips partially off. And then now I have him on the other side of the street in a parking lot there, and the fight is on. He's punching me, and I'm just trying to get control of him to take him to the ground, and fighting, and he breaks free. And as he breaks free, I grab his t-shirt, and it completely comes off. So he's just bare chest and jeans and sneakers. He runs around the sidewalk, and he's pulling away from me, and I'm out of breath already with the fighting, the running, the boots, and all that. And it looks like I'm not going to be able to catch him. He's going to get away, but he stops and turns around and comes at me to take me out. And so I pull the baton, and I hit him a few strikes on the outside of the knee. Didn't even phase him. He's fighting. He breaks free again, goes all the way down the sidewalk, starts across an open lot, and I thought, he's gone. He easily just keep on going, and through a residential area, I'm not going to get him. But instead of just keep going, he turned around and came at me again. And so I stopped, and as he came in, I tried hitting him with the baton again. He reaches in, and he puts both hands on my gun and starts to pull my gun out. And I knew then this, because I've been in fights before, and you know, and but this one I knew this guy was for real. Especially twice he could have gotten away and didn't, and now he's pulling on my gun. This guy wanted me dead, and I knew that. And I thought, if that gun comes out of the holster, he's been stronger than me so far. And so I remember thinking, please God, don't let the gun come out. And then I took my baton. As I'm pushing him off the gun, I tried hitting him at the same time, but he swung and he knocked the baton out of my hands, and it landed on the ground, and we both went for it. And he just scooped it up first. And so I backed up against, there was like a wall. I backed up, and he picked it up. And so I drew, and I yelled at him, "Stop, stop, drop it." And he came forward, and just before he hit coming towards my head, I fired one shot, and I saw the bullet actually hit his chest, and he just like looked up like, what the, what the F? And every time the heart pumped, blood shot out about 3 feet. And I holstered and I grabbed him and I tried to help him to the ground. I got him on the ground and I covered up the hole with my hands, and the blood just seeped right up both arms. I ripped my shirt off. I covered up the hole, and it filled immediately. When I looked up, it was a Sunday afternoon right by the beach, and I looked up. It looked like about 200 people, that were standing there watching this. And a girl came running up with my radio, and she goes, here's your radio. So I called in, officer needs help, and made sure I told him that I was okay. I said,
Hmm.
it seemed like hours before I heard any sirens. I'm sure it was less than a minute, but in your head, it just, everything slowed down. And I said to people, hey, did anybody see what happened? And people are like, yeah, he was going to hit you in the head. And other people, he's going to kill you and all that. I go, please make sure you wait here and
Yeah.
talk to him. I was thinking about that. I want everybody to know that it was, that I was justified. Then they showed up, and the sergeant, found out what happened real quick, and he says, hey, take Smith back to the office. And I'm going to tell you,
And we're going to talk about, I want to talk about that aspect of it, the
okay,
aftermath and how that works. Um, and we'll get into that. It's so important for people to really know about, what's it like, not only going through the actual incident and this attempt on your life, um, but really, as traumatic as that is, it's really only the beginning. It's the tip of the iceberg as far as the entire process for the officer.
yeah,
I want to go back to something, Brian, and again, this is the second time we've talked about this in the last couple of days. But something really hit home with me. I mean, you really brought it out here in this conversation about when the officer was going for your gun, pulling at it, and you're trying to secure it. He's trying to take it. And there's only one reason that anybody would be trying to take your gun away from you, because they want to use it to kill you. Now, I've been in that situation a couple of times in a physical fight where, I was lucky enough where I was able to physically subdue, um, probably through maybe some unorthodox methods. Because at that
at that
point,
point, you're
you
going to
don't
do
care
what
what
you
kind of
do.
force you
Yeah.
use. Yeah, you do what you do what you have to do. There's really no way to explain to someone what that feels like when someone is trying to take your weapon, and in your mind they're trying to take your life, and it happens so quick, and all you're thinking about is survival at that point. All you're thinking about, what do I have to do? What do I have to do to overcome this threat? What do I have to do to go home at the end of this tour of duty today? What do I have to? That's all you're thinking about. I'm not going to lose. I'm not going to lose. I'm not going to lose. And I don't really have a question here. It's just that you reminded me of things a couple of times, at least a couple of times I was in that situation. And fortunately, either backup rolled up or I got the person in handcuffs before things went the wrong way. But if you can recall, in other words, where did your mind go other than, I mean, you said it a minute ago about, this guy is trying to kill me. Um, I don't know. I mean, some people, I mean, I know I've talked to other officers in the situation, they feel like they're weak. In other words, the nerves, they feel like you've lost a little muscle control. You get tunnel vision. You forget training sometimes. Do you remember any
I
aspects of this? Again, this is 38 years
Yeah,
ago.
if you can, I think I have more to explain after the second one,
Okay.
because everything slowed down, and I can tell you exactly every minute of it. On this one, I can tell you that I had been in fights. When you have drunk drivers, man,
Mhm.
that their fight.
Yeah.
Other times, people where they're felons, where they know they're going back to prison, and you're the only thing standing in their way. So I've been in
It's a
those
different story.
fights, and I've
Yeah.
been in some serious fights before that. But this one, you knew that threshold. You knew all this time was a fight as well. Even though he kept coming back, I thought, man, this guy just wants to take me out. Um, and so this one, when he pulled on the gun, it was completely different. That whole incident changed from that point because I knew that this wasn't going to end well, and one of us was going to come up dead out of this one, or very seriously injured. And I knew from that point that I don't have anybody with me. I don't have any help. Nobody's there, and and even part of that, when I looked up, when you talk about tunnel vision, when it was over, and I looked up and saw like 200 people there, and a part of me, I was only 24 years old, and I looked up and thought, "Are you kidding me? Not one single person tried to help me." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
really, which I get it after the gun, but before we got to the gun, I thought, "Wow, nobody even tried." And I get that people aren't going to, some people aren't, just don't want to do that. But yeah, there was a difference. You knew from that
Hmm.
point, this is for real. Um, and so
Yeah.
and so anyway, at that point, um, I knew I knew from the blood and the way it was coming out, he wasn't going to survive. But they ended up taking me to the hospital, and this is where I think, and it's bad enough what you go through, but I guess the department didn't have much experience in it. But they took me to the hospital. I had this blood dried up on my arms, and for some reason they wanted to clean it up, and I didn't want to, almost to punish myself. And so I didn't want to clean it. And he says, hey, if this guy has AIDS or something like that, or some other disease, that blood is on you. So then I did wash, but I remember the feeling of not wanting to. While I was in, the different rooms in emergency room, where they first, see you, I was in the room, and they wheeled this guy into the room right across the hall from me. And I'm standing by the door watching. And again, I'm alone at this point. They just took me to the hospital, and nobody was really there with me. I think maybe there was a sergeant like outside the door or by the door. But then his door opens up and the nurse walks out, and she stared right at me. I'll never forget. She looked at me and she goes, "Well, he's dead." Like blaming me. Which, I mean, it was me that shot, but acting like
Right.
like I murdered him instead of. And I remember that clear as day. And I remember the detective from the police department coming in, and he says, "Hey, we want to draw blood to make sure you're not under the influence of anything, alcohol or drugs." And okay, I gave him the blood sample, and he goes, "You know what? We need to also get a urine sample to make sure you're not under anything." So I gave him a urine sample. And then they took me down to their police station, and they put me in a room. And then the detective turns to one of the uniformed officers, and he hands him the urine cup. And he said, "Take Officer Smith and get a second urine sample." Well, there's a men's room right across the hall from this conference room where you're at. Instead of taking me across the hall, they took me down into the holding cell, and where you take criminals. And
Yeah.
and I said, "Well, I don't know that I can go." And the guy goes, "Well, we'll just wait till you can." Like, again, like I was a criminal. And so I gave
Yeah.
him the second sample. I went upstairs. They sat me at the end of the table, and there was a lieutenant in there now, but he never said a word. He just sat. He wasn't a very popular lieutenant. He wasn't a people person. In fact,
Hmm.
most people didn't like him, and he just sat there. And then one of the worst things ever is they read me Miranda. Now, just to tell you, 26 years old, I just got off probation like 2 months before that. So, or a month and a half.
And for everybody to know, in other words, that means you've been on the job for about a
Yeah,
year, just over a year.
13 months. Yeah. So
Yeah.
um, then they read me Miranda. Well, as an officer, you're reading Miranda to people and criminals. And so I waived my rights because, number one, what's the first thing you think, right, as a young cop when people say, "No, I don't want to speak, I want my attorney"? You're thinking they're guilty, right?
Being guilty.
And the
Yeah.
second thing is I wanted to waive my rights because I wanted everybody to know that what I did was justified and it was a good shooting. So I did. But here's the other problem: they probably had probably 8 or 9 people in this room, different deputy DAs and detectives, and they're throwing it at me like, ask this question. Somebody over here would ask questions. Somebody over here would do follow. The way they were attacking me, I just felt like they were all attacking. And then a senior officer who is kind of known as a rebel rouser against management, he knocks on the door. They open the door and he goes, "Hey, he has to go to the bathroom." And they knew who he was. They said, "Hey, you need to leave." And he goes, "No, he has to go to the bathroom." At the time, I didn't want anybody to interrupt. I just wanted to get through this. So I don't know that I appreciated it then as much as I do now looking back, that he was looking out for me. And so he goes, "Brian, I said you have to go to the bathroom." So he takes me out and he goes, "Don't talk to anybody. I'm getting an attorney here. Don't talk." And I said, "No, Fred, I appreciate it, but I'm going to finish talking." And I did. But it was good advice by him. You never know, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
so this shooting was, I'm going to guess it was in the afternoon, maybe. I'm guessing 7 o'clock, still light out because it's in May, and I didn't get to go home till probably 3 or 4 in the morning. That's how long it went. And then you come home, you don't know how to act. Your life just
Yeah.
changed. You're not innocent anymore as far as innocent in life, right? And I didn't know how to act. I had my wife and at the time 2 boys, and it was really hard. And then my parents lived in Philadelphia. They got the call and they immediately got on a plane and flew out here. And my dad was telling everybody, "Don't say what happened," but it was a politician's son, and that's the thing
Hmm.
is, they said he had been involved in a lot of violent things before. He would get arrested. The next day, his father, who was this politician, would he was actually the ex-mayor of the city.
Now, just sort of clarify that the suspect, the suspect in the shooting here, that's who you're talking
Yes,
about.
yeah, the
Yes.
suspect,
So,
a bunch of incidents of violence, and he'd get arrested, and then his father would call the chief, and
because his father was
previous
mayor.
time, and he would get released. So in my opinion, he got bulletproof, right? Like, probably a bad word to use, but he was
I was going to
right.
say
Not a
that's
good
yeah.
word, but he got away with everything, and so he had this cocky attitude. And the newspaper said, "Ex-mayor's son slain by CHP officer," and I just happened to see the newspaper laying there when I saw it. And then they hired an attorney in town, and that went on for 5 years of civil depositions. This guy, I think he was 29. Some of those details, I could be wrong
Hmm.
on, but he was under the influence, and they would they would say stuff about me like I could go to prison and all this, and everybody say, "Nah, don't worry about it." Well, you're the one that can go to prison. Of course, you're going to worry about it, right? And especially today, right? But that's a time, another story.
Yeah.
Um,
There's another
that's
story.
another
Yeah.
story. And anyway, it
Yeah.
went 5 years, and it did go to civil trial. And in the end, they sued the state, not me, but in a civil trial,
Right.
the jury ruled 11-1 in my favor, and the one that voted against me said she agrees I should have fired, but I should have shot him in the leg, right? And that was their reasoning.
It's
Um,
pure ignorance.
but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so you get the like you get the nightmares. And I mean, I would see my body getting shot up. And in college, I was told that you don't dream in color, and you can't dream that you're dead. And I can tell you, after the dreams I went through, that's not true, man. At least in my head, it was some brutal dreams. And so what I started to do was, I would purposely, because I couldn't wake myself up out of these dreams. They were so bad and so violent that I would fall asleep and force myself to wake up before I had them. Well, then that caused sleeping disorders, and then that caused stomach problems. And then for your viewers, one of the important things are, you don't realize that you're so irritable that any little thing that other people do, it pisses you off or upsets you. And I remember my wife, who was very good and helping me and stuff, but I guess she was going somewhere one time, and I said, "You're going to wear that?" And I remember her saying, "You're going to tell me what to wear now?" I mean, I wasn't
Hmm.
sleeping. And then I would, in the morning, I would just, maybe wake up about 10 in the morning, only get maybe 3 hours sleep, and then just sit there and watch TV all day. I didn't want to do anything. And people wanted to talk to me. And another good thing she did was she would screen all my calls, because even though I didn't want to talk to people, I wanted to know who called. And a classmate of mine, I thought he had a good idea. And I'm telling you these things so people can maybe do it and stuff. But he just sent like flowers and said, "Hey, we're behind you," and stuff. And then one day, about three or, that's in the next story. I'll get to that later. Um, but
Oh, well, yeah, we're gonna.
yeah. Oh, and the highway patrol has a policy: if you're involved in a shooting where you're shot at, you have to see a counselor, a
Mhm.
psychologist within 48 hours. And I can tell you, as cops, we don't want to do that. We don't want to go. But I'm going to tell you, I went. Luckily, the first guy I got was very helpful. So I would recommend, if your department doesn't have that policy, get the policy. And if they don't, and you're the shooter, go. It's really
Yeah.
really good to get that off your chest, and that kind of helped. Uh,
Well, we're definitely going to get to that general topic,
yeah,
and you can kind of drill down on specifics when we get to peer support and how that came about with Highway Patrol. There are a couple of things going back to this shooting, which at least one of them um, are common to all shootings. And you talked about when you waived your Miranda rights and you're answering questions, and you said you're getting peppered from everybody, the detectives and the DA. You mentioned the DA, and I want people to understand that whether it's legal or not legal, it's justified, not justified, it's still a homicide. It's the taking of a human life. And so the DA, rules out to all these scenes. And again, where the shooting happened, I'm not sure what the protocol was there. I know in Los Angeles County, where I worked for 30 years, you worked for some time there as a captain. Um, that's a protocol. But like you said, Brian, being on one side of that, the Miranda rights, even at that point, just for 13 months, reading people Miranda rights and things like that, then being on the receiving end of that, as a cop, and then being asked questions by a prosecutor, because that prosecutor has to investigate the
right.
homicide and they have to make a determination whether it was a justifiable homicide or not, and determine whether or not it was a criminal action. And in your case, of course, they determined it was not. Um, but these are part of just some of the things. I know we're summarizing here in this short time we have on the podcast, but these are some of the things that an officer involved in a shooting has to go through. And so, what people read in the newspaper or see on social media or see on the nightly news is just the tip of the iceberg. It is a moment in time, but it's just the beginning for the officer. So, moving forward, and it's not very far forward in time. It's just 4 years later. I think a little less than 4 years later, to be exact, maybe a little more, right around 4 years. You were involved, like you said earlier. Hey, don't worry, kid. Hey, you got your one shooting out of the way. You're not going to be involved in another one. And then 4 years later, here we are again in a different station, different place geographically in state of California. Again, we're state police, so we can transfer or promote into different places. Basically, the about 120 commands stations in the state of California for CHP. So you can end up any place, but you were at a different location this time. And I'll take it from there. 4 years later, what happened?
So just to touch on what you said also about, the DA and all that. Um, this shooting happened on in May, beginning of May, and it was never cleared because of the political involvement. It was never cleared until September 15th. And every couple months, the newspaper would put an article: Smith could end up in prison and all this. And you should never put anybody through that where they wait till
Mhm.
September. But and and I'll tell you that when the article came out and said that I was cleared of the shooting because they had no choice in this, the one of the things that they said was Smith said that he was trying to pull the gun out of the holster. And although this is a DA's ruling, Smith said he's trying to take the gun out of the holster, and although several witnesses said that they saw his hand on the gun, we think he was trying to keep the gun in the holster, right? So they were trying to play the games of
crazy.
you know what I mean,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And then, as you know, we have DAs, especially down where you worked, right, that are not supportive of police. So, you,
Not today for
yeah,
sure. It wasn't always like that, but yeah,
yeah.
nowadays, whole different
And
story.
so that's another reason. Think about whether you should have an attorney before you say anything. I used to tell people, hey, I don't know if you should or you shouldn't, because stress wise and anxiety wise, you want to hurry up and get that word out. May not be a bad idea to have an attorney, especially like we're saying, when you have district attorneys now that are actually against cops, right? Um,
Yeah, well, I highly recommend it. Hopefully the DA in Los Angeles County is on his last political legs here with his election coming up, but it's a
yeah,
different
there's
topic
another
for a
show.
different
There's
show.
another show.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I did get back to work. I used to be a big DUI and stolen cars and stuff like that. Really a hard charger. I just love my job, and I transferred to one office, and then we were going to buy a house in another office that was cheaper, and so we moved up there and got to know everybody, and I was right back in the game, making a lot of arrests and Master 10851 award for all these stolen cars and all that, and always a leader in DUI arrests, and so it was New Year's Eve in 1989, and this I worked afternoon shift, so I was done at 10:15, and it's New Year's, and not that we my wife and I did anything, because we had three kids, including a 9-month old, and so the sergeant came to me and he said, "Hey, Smith, you want to work 4 hours overtime for New Year's?" And I go, "Sure, yeah, I'll work." So they asked my classmate from the academy, which we never worked together in the same car, but they asked him if he wanted to work as well. And so we went out and drove around, and we arrested a drunk driver and booked, and then got hit the road again and made some stops. And then I guess it was about 10 after 1 in the morning, on New Year's Day, January 1st, 1990. And we were going up a main street where it's known for hookers and drugs and drunk drivers, a lot of bars on the strip. Excuse me. And so I said, "Look, it's almost time to quit. Why don't we drive up this street? And if we see a drunk, great, right? We'll get another one." And we're driving up, no other traffic. There's a pickup truck in a parking lot, empty parking lot, not even a business or anything. And we're the only ones going northbound. He could have waited till we passed, but just as we get on him, he pulls right out in front of us and starts weaving, almost hits a center divider. I was like, "Hey, here's another drunk driver." We take off the road. And I light him up, and he pulls over. We both get out of the car. We start to approach. Just as we get up on the car, he floors it, takes off. So we're now in pursuit. We put out the pursuit. Another car comes behind us, and now we're chasing this guy. And he pulls into his driveway. And as he pulls into his driveway, the normally, or after a pursuit, you would do a high risk stop, like take your time and all that. But there are a lot of people that think if they get to their driveway, it's King's X and we can't do anything. And I told my
Mhm.
partner, he's going to run for the door, because the house was just right there, a small house. So he's in a pickup truck. So I get out the left side. My partner gets out the right side. And as I walk up the left side, I get to the left rear tire and I hear a muffled pop. It's New Year's Eve. We've been hearing them all night long. It sounded like it came from the next yard. It didn't even sound like it came from anywhere near us. And I just figured it was a firecracker, for the night. I take two more steps. I look in the cab of the truck and I see the barrel of an Uzi, which looked like it's about that big, obviously, but it looked that big. I remember, and this is where I told you about your senses and stuff. I remember standing there looking at the barrel of the Uzi, and all this ran through my head. I thought, wait, that wasn't a firecracker. That was a shot. He had already fired once. And then I thought about, I have three boys at home. I'm dead. They're they're not going to have a father. And then I thought, my 9-year-old won't even know who I am. He's not old enough to even remember me. Believe it or not, all that ran through my head. The backup officer said that he saw me look in, back my head up, and a muzzle flash come out. I never saw that. But I guess, and this is where you talk about training, I guess without even realizing with my reflexes, I came behind the bed of the truck and I fired one shot through the rear window, and it hit him in the center of the back of the head. My partner was over on the right side. He fired a couple times into the cab. And so now the guy is sitting there and the Uzi is sticking out the window. And so I yelled, "Get your hands up, get your hands up." He just laid there. I jumped in the bed of the truck. I came up. I tapped him. He didn't move. I grabbed the barrel and I pulled it out. And then it hit me just that quick. Wow, you killed two people. You've only you've only been on a job for a short time and you've killed two people, and it starts sinking in. I joined this job to help people. Right now, I've killed two. But Tom came back, and Tom's one of these guys, not very huggy or anything like that. Like you don't even shake his hand. Nice guy, but he's just not that way. And and sorry, but he came back and we hugged each other because I think we both realized we almost weren't there. And so the other officers, oh, by the way, the other backup officer fired one shot, and they said it went through the thick of the collar, of the coat collar. The other officer came around, was going to fire, but he realized he was in crossfire, and wisely, smartly, didn't fire. He didn't have this tunnel vision. He saw the officer and knew it wasn't a good thing to do. The problem is a few minutes later, when everything's calmed down, this other officer pulls up, finds out what happens, and goes up to the guy that didn't shoot and say, "Why didn't you shoot? Were you afraid?" And I don't know if it has anything or maybe it just happened, but that officer started making felony stops alone without backup. He, I think he just always wanted to prove that he wasn't afraid. When in fact, it's a shame that he had to feel that way because he was very smart in how he handled it. Again, the sergeant showed up, wanted us to go back to the office, and once again, I didn't want to leave. I just wanted to stare at the scene, and he says, "No, you need to go back." And then we got back. Now, what they do is if they take your gun, they give you a gun right away, right?
Right.
And so they took my gun, and the sergeant got my buddy's or my brother-in-law's gun and went to give it to me, or somebody's gun. And I said, "You know what?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want it." And he goes, "Take it. That's policy. I'm supposed to give it to you." And I go, "I don't want it."
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, "Well, can I just put it in your locker?" I go, "I don't care. Do whatever." So it's good. It's good that you replace the gun, but sometimes if they don't want it, he probably did the right thing because he wanted to cover all the bases
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that.
And Brian, if I may, pardon the interruption, but I like for the listeners and viewers to really understand why that process happens. I can explain it, or you can explain it with the taking your gun and then giving you a loaner weapon or replacement weapon. Can you
Yeah,
explain why that
it's
happens?
the same reason as you don't put an officer in a back seat. You have to
Right.
use several cars because you put them in a back seat. That's where you put the criminals. And taking a gun away from an officer can do some psychological damage where he feels like he right away, oh, I did something wrong, they took my gun away. And it's the security that you have with your gun. You're still you know not saying you did anything wrong. Now obviously if an officer goes and murders somebody, that's a different story, right? Then but in a case like this, it's very insulting to the officer, and you're kind of taking their heart away. And Mark, you can even expand on that. If,
Well, yeah, that's and we all went through this training that if you happen to be the first person on scene, or if you witness a shooting, you know, they want you to do this. They want you to go ahead and secure that weapon, obviously for evidentiary purposes. Um, Number of rounds and maybe if there are multiple officers, uh, which officers actually hit the suspect, which rounds actually hit the suspect, things like this. But they want you to give them a gun back for the reasons that you explained, or give them a loaner weapon. They even say, "Hey, give them your weapon. Give them your weapon. That's fine. Just get a weapon back in their
yeah,
holster." so they feel whole, like you said. So they feel that, um, there's an investigation, but right now that's down the road. You're still a peace officer. There's no reason believe you've done anything wrong. And I know there was a lot of there was a fair amount of contention about that process for a long time. And it certainly came down to what you're explaining right now, where that became the process. I'm not sure if it still is. It was 4 years ago when I left the
Yeah,
department,
and
for the most
we have
part.
to keep it down. Now, the other thing that I'll tell administrators that are watching this, um, if because they're going to take the gun for ballistics. That's how they could tell who shot whom, right?
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
but the one thing that I felt they did wrong in a second shooting, and it wasn't that big a deal, but after they test fired the weapon and stuff, they gave me back my gun dirty, and really, it's almost like, to me, it's like there's a homicide in your house, and then you get the return to the house, and the blood's still on the wall, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
the one thing I said was, "Hey, can somebody clean this for?" I actually told him, "Can somebody clean the gun for me?" And so my brother-in-law, who worked at the office, said, "Hey, I'll clean it." And you know what? I told him for the next probably 23 years that it still bothered me, just so that he would clean it. No, I'm just kidding.
You had me on the hook
Yeah,
there, right?
yeah.
And I said, yeah.
But so
But
here's the other thing: is the other three officers knew that I had been in a fatal shooting, and so they were all coming up to me before while we were standing around the office, and they're like, "Hey, do we do Miranda? What do we do?" Like, nobody knew.
right.
And I said,
Hmm.
"Well," and I started talking about it. Well, the sheriff's department in the second shooting said, "Hey, you guys are the victims. You're not the suspects. We don't read Miranda. We don't do all this other
Hmm.
stuff for you." And I'll tell you, they handled it a lot better. And I'll tell you something else. That shooting was cleared probably within a week or so. For them to get the
Hmm.
ballistics and go over everything, they it was just a lot smoother. But I still didn't get to go home. Right, this happened at 1 o'clock. I still didn't get home till probably 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. And then and
Yeah.
then the rag newspaper put an article in, that this guy that the CHP killed. The articles came across as, he was on his way to buy brown sugar to bake chocolate chip cookies for everybody. So the highway patrol said he had, I think, 17 or 19 cents in his possession. He was not doing that. And he had an Uzi with 4 fully loaded magazines tucked in his belt. And so the highway patrol said that he had an Uzi with. So the family released a thing that the newspaper printed saying, "Oh, he felt bad that he didn't get people Christmas gifts, so he was going to sell the Uzi. He was on his way to sell the Uzi in a magazine so he could buy Christmas gifts for everybody." And finally, the captain of the office called the newspaper and said, "Knock off, the BS. You know, these
Good.
are all lies and stuff like that." And then nothing really happened with court. But when it cleared, like a week later, so that's what I was telling you about, the nightmares, and I thought I wanted to be a state trooper my whole life, but I don't want to do it anymore. So about a week and a half later, when they cleared the shooting, the lieutenant showed up at the door, and a sergeant, and the lieutenant told my wife, "Hey, they cleared his shooting. He can come back to work tomorrow." And her and I had already talked about these things, and she goes, "Yeah, I don't think he's coming back." And the lieutenant goes, "Well, he has to come back." She goes, "Well, if you make him come back, I think you're going to lose him." And so the captain shows up that afternoon because the lieutenant went back and said, "Hey, he's refusing to come back to work." The captain came to the door. I let him in, and he says, "Hey, Brian, you can take up to a year, man. Don't stress yourself. If you don't want to come back, hey, don't come back." The problem is now the stress of the shootings turned into, um, do I stay? Do I leave? I wanted to be a state trooper since I was 5. I don't want to do anything else but this, but I didn't want to kill anybody anymore. I didn't want to be in that position anymore. And how close it came to my life, and just thinking about all that stuff. And I don't know really your whole audience, but and Tom went back to work right away. And I
This is your partner officer who also
Yeah,
also
he
fired.
went back to work, And then another lieutenant at the office who nobody really cared for, he we started playing soccer because the police Olympics were going to be in that town, so we put a team. And so I was also playing hockey at the time, and I played hockey with this guy. And then after one of the practices, he takes me aside. He's a lieutenant, and he says, "Hey, what's your problem, man?" He goes, "You knew you may have to kill somebody. You killed them, so get your ass back to work, man." He goes, "What'd you think, that you're just going to be like selling tickets to a carnival or something along those lines?" And man, it just really hit me that, hey, this is what everybody thinks. And then I started to think, hey, maybe I'm making this stuff up in my head. And then the nightmares. I mean, I had nightmares where we I won't bore everybody, but one of them, we pull up. There's three of us in a pickup truck. We stop at the guard shack, and I said, "Man, they're going to want me." And they go, "Why you?" And I said, "Because I killed two people." And we pull up, and he points to me, and he goes, "Hey, step out." Has me walk over, sit down in a chair, bend over, close my eyes, and he takes a big battle axe, those big axe things, and chops my head off. And just before my head hits the floor, man, my wife woke me up. I was screaming, right? These dreams were so graphic, and just over and over. And then this other one, I'm looking at an officer in a casket, and then they go to close the casket, and I'm on the inside of the casket, and I'm like, "Wait, I'm okay, I'm okay." And they're like, "No, you're not." And it just gets dark. I mean, the nightmare, they were just horrific, just horrific. And then not knowing whether I should go back or not, that just ate away. Do I stay? I didn't enjoy the time I had off because I was just it
Mhm.
was just, and then I didn't want to talk to anybody. My wife screened the calls, and then one day, and this is another good idea for you, is that I my wife would screen also at the door. These three officers show up, and I go, "Hey, is Brian here?" She goes, "Yeah, but he can't." He goes, "No, you need." It was a senior officer. "Hey, have him come to the door." So I went to the door, and he goes, "Hey, let's go bowling." I go, "No, I don't want to go bowling." He goes, "That wasn't a question. Get dressed. I'm staying here until you get in this car." And we did. We went bowling, and I actually I felt better. And then I thought, hey, this is good that I got out. And then one of the officers says, "When are you coming back, man? Like, why are you making this a big?" And it just ruined the whole day. But good
Yeah.
idea while it lasted until that other officer said something. Um,
Well, Brian, this really the officer that wanted to take you bowling, I think this, and you tell me, but it seems like this is a really good I wouldn't even call it a segue because it really is peer support when you think about it. But this really is a good transition to take us to really what your leadership did for the department, out of these incredibly traumatic incidents that you experienced, that you lived through, you survived, and how that brought you to the place where you were responsible for creating something that did not exist before and still serving CHP officers, and not just CHP officers, but other officers and other agencies 30 years later. So tell us about
yeah.
how this came
One of the
to
things I
be.
wanted to tell you first, Mark, is that my dilemma of whether I should go back, whether what I should do. And so a family priest, a friend of the family, said, "Hey, I'm going to send you." It's a place called Three Rivers by Visalia, and he said, "I want you to spend a few days there. All you do is prayer, and then you go in the mountains, you go in the woods, you whatever you want to do." So I show up. We do the morning prayer. You eat breakfast, and you just go out up into the mountains. And I took a Bible with me. All this, so that the night before I was supposed to leave, the drive up, I prayed, "God, just give me the answer. Do I stay? Do I go? Do I stay? Do I go?" And I read a lot. Anyway, there's no TVs or anything. So the last day that I was there, I was supposed to leave it the next morning, and I got woken up at like 2 o'clock in the morning. I was the only one in the room. I got woken up, and the message was, "Read the Bible." And I'm like, wow, this is the miracle you always hear about. And so I got excited. I pick up the Bible. I read and read, and nothing. I didn't get anything out of it. And I thought, well, there goes my miracle. I put the bookmark in, I close the Bible, have the breakfast, I leave, I'm driving home, and I felt so relieved. I thought, you know what? he said I have up to a year. Why am I worrying about it, man? I don't have to make a decision right now. I'll just wait. So I get home and I tell my story to my wife the way I just told it to you, thinking it was a miracle, and it wasn't. At the end of the story, she goes, "So what did you read?" I go, "I don't know." She goes, "You don't know what you read?" I go, "No." And I said, "But I put the bookmark in there." And she goes, "Well, let me see." We opened the book and it's Matthew, where it says, "Oh ye, oh, um, oh ye of little faith. If I'm going to take care of the birds and the animals, don't you think I'm going to take care of you?" I'm summarizing, but don't you think I'm going to take care of you that I love a lot more? So stop worrying and put your faith in me. That changed. She looked at me and she goes, "What do you mean you didn't get the message from God?" And so to this day, Saint Matthew is my favorite. But it did change me. And then eventually, and you talk about weird thing with the mind of my sons, my especially my oldest son, who's now a sergeant on the highway patrol. He didn't want me to go back, and yet I decided to go back. And why this happened? The day I picked to go back was his birthday, and I don't know why that happened. But anyway, getting back to what you were saying. So I spoke to priests, I spoke to friends, I spoke to different people, I read different things, and it helped talking to people. But one day I went to the uniform shop before I went to return to work, and I came out, and as I'm walking out, this other officer from another agency came walking up, and he goes, "Hey, aren't you Brian Smith?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You killed two people, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." He goes,
Mm.
"I killed somebody." And I go, "You did?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Do you ever feel this or that?" And Mark, I'm going to tell you, I don't think it's an exaggeration. We stood there and talked somewhere between 2 and 3 hours. It was so therapeutic to know I wasn't making this. I felt like I was a weak person. I felt like that, wow, I'm making this up, and am I doing it to get attention? And why am I acting this way? And yet he would describe what he went through, and I was like, this is amazing. For the first time in what, 4.5 years, I was validated that what I was going through was real. And so there's a guy, Rob Paris. He was a captain on the highway patrol, and I went to him and I told him, I go, "Rob," because this is back in like 90, 91, 90, 91, and I told him about this. I go, "Rob, we really need to develop something that officers that are involved in similar traumatic events," at the time I just said shooting, officers that are involved in shootings should be able to talk to other officers that have been involved in shootings. And because they didn't have peer support back then, right? So I figured I invented the idea. But of course, the FBI, apparently the FBI and maybe one or two other agencies had a something like that. But I went to the commissioner's office, and they said, I thought they were going to assign a unit to do it, and they said, "Look, here are the keys to a state car, and you can take the time and go ahead and put this together." So I went to our central files at the highway patrol, and I went and met with officers, and I can tell you, years later, these officers talking about their incidents would break down and get emotional. And some of them were like, we should have had this long time ago. And then I spoke to one officer that just attacked me. He said, "Look, if you want to be a puss and stuff, and you can't handle the job, I mean, literally yelling at me, you're not strong enough to do it, but don't bother me. I had no problems." I thought, wow, this guy's is having issues. But it bothered me still that he was attacking me like that. And then I went to an office on their training day, because after we got the peer support program and they adopted it, so the highway patrol went with my recommendations, policies, all this stuff. And so I created the peer support program for the California Highway Patrol. And to this day, my son, who's a sergeant on the patrol, he went to peer support training, and they're still giving me the credit, which is nice. Not that it's a big deal, but it's just um, and so I went to give a class at one office training day where they do half the officers one week and the other half the other week. And I went, and at the end, I always have a lot of officers involved and stuff that would come up and talk to me about it. And this one day I had the first training day, one of the officers said, "Hey, I know, I'm going to make it up, but John Jones." And this officer, he was in a couple shootings, and And he never has any problems. And I told him, hey, and this is for your viewers too, you may be involved in shootings and not have any issues at all. That's perfectly normal too. Even fatal shootings, that's okay too. Don't look for problems if they're not there. But he said this officer, man, he's fine. It never bothered him. And I go, well, that's possible. So the following week, when I did the second half to that same office, afterwards, people came up to talk, and then one officer pulled me aside. He goes, hey, I was involved in a couple shootings, and he goes, they kind of made me out to sound like a hero. He goes, but it still bothers me to this day, and listening to you got me very upset, and people don't realize what you go through. And I said, well, nice to meet you. What's your name? And he's John
Yeah,
Jones.
that was
It was that guy
supposedly
that
okay.
the other
Yeah.
guy. Yeah. And one thing I forgot to tell you also, my partner, when he went back to work right away, about 2 or 3 months later, he shows up at my front door, and I go, hey, what are you doing here? He goes, I can't take it anymore. He goes, I tried to go back. He goes, but he goes, I can't do it. And I guess he tried to talk to people and family, and he said he broke down, and so I can tell you this because
Mhm.
I'm not mentioning names, but people weren't really supportive. And he goes, hey, I'm going to resign. I'm going in today to resign. I just wanted to tell you first. And I go, hey, they have something called 4800
Yeah.
time. Like I'm the hero, right? Like the captain. But he retired. He never returned to the job. Um, and basically, I think he would have been okay
Yeah.
if he
And
would have been able to
4,800
get
time
help.
for the
And I
listeners, that's just it's paid time off for non-duty injury or an incident, things like this for up to a year. That you utilize, Brian, with your incidents. One,
yeah, on
and
duty.
didn't mean
Yeah,
to cut you
yeah,
off, but just wanted to inform the audience what that was. So go ahead.
sure. And you know what? To this day, I run into people that because I spoke to so many people that I go to retirement parties and stuff like that, and people will come up and thank me and tell me, you know what, you saved my job, and I was going to quit, and you helped, and other people that have helped, people that are peer support members now, and it's expanded to other members of the department and dispatch and all that. Um, that it's very rewarding to know, that it is helping people. And now, we hear about different incidents, and the first thing you hear is that peer support is there. So I love the fact that we have great people out there on the highway
Yeah.
patrol. I'm sure other departments as well that have their peer support programs, but it's so valuable. And to this day, to talk to people that are involved in incidents and find out that they had no peer support. In this day and age, every department should have some form of a peer support. Chaplain programs are awesome. The other programs are awesome, but I'm telling you, if you don't have a peer support or you don't have a way of using other departments' peer support, it's it's
Well,
it's very
Brian,
valuable.
I couldn't agree with you more. And again, I'm somebody from the outside looking in with this particular topic because I never was involved in the officer involved shooting. I'm grateful that I wasn't. Um, and you talk about this one officer that was involved in the shooting with you that eventually resigned, retired early. Although he said he felt he could come back right away, he did. And it reminds me of a story. And again, this is not to take any fire away from what you talked about because it's um it's so important, but it just reminded me of an officer I knew before I was on the job, CHP officer, and I won't use
Hmm.
his name either. Um, but he was involved in a very high profile shooting. I said high profile internally. His shooting was used as a such an important training tool for me when I was a cadet. I was in the academy in 1990 when you had 4 years in the job. But if you may remember, uh, later on, as you went there to the academy as an officer to visit for training, things like that, there was a picture in the gymnasium where we train every morning as cadets, and it's a picture of one of our officers' vests. And I think it had 4 bullet holes in it
Yeah.
for impact. And there's a caption under it says, "The beat goes on." In other words, at the time, it wasn't mandatory to wear the vest. And that officer had worn his and saved his life. But he told me, as you did to the whole audience, he told me one-on-one about the shooting. Again, I knew him before he was in the job, and when I was an officer, I actually did a ride-along with him, where he works, not too far from the CHP Academy. I was up there for in-service, and I went down to his station one night to ride along with him. He told me about it. He showed me the crime scene photos in his locker. He saw it pasted up. And he said, "Yeah, Mark, they were all patting me on my back after the shooting." He got shot in the back, by the way, obviously a number of times. The bullet didn't penetrate. He rolled over and he killed the suspect at point blank range from the ground. Um, and he was gung ho about it, even years later, telling me, "Yeah, it's fine, fine." He eventually left the department, psychological retirement. He told me later on, he said, "I really never got over that. I had nightmares about it all the time. I never wanted to admit it." And that was long before peer support program. And I wonder to this day, Brian, had someone like you 6 or 7 years earlier, I think that shooting was before the peer support program came into fruition. Had that been around for him, would he have had a full tour of duty with the Highway Patrol? Would he done his full 25, 30 years? I don't know. None of us know. But that tool was not there for him.
Right.
But the reason I tell that story, again, this is not to upstage what you talked about. It's actually to highlight what you talked about, because I have that personal relationship with that former officer. He told me the story, and so similar to what you talked about with nightmares and things like this, and struggling about, do I go back? Should I retire? And your wife, same kind of questioning and things like this. I want people to understand, when officers are involved in these situations, not every single time, as you made very clear, and as I know from talking to officers, some officers deal with it, whatever their chemistry is, in a different way than the next officer. But they can have such an impact, not only in one's career, but one's life for the rest of their life. This is what officers go through. And this is what officers do their best to train for. This is why training is so important. It's so you're not thinking, you're reacting based on repetition, based on training, things like this. And and this could potentially actually help in the subsequent period, the recovery time. It's did I do everything I could within training, policy, and law, procedure, and things like this? Anyway, it just struck a nerve. We were talking about those nightmares and things like this. One officer retiring early, just like the friend I have, did the same thing. But I'm going to give you the final word, Brian. This has been so insightful. I hope a lot of people not only listen to this, but share this with as many people as they can, not only officers, family members and coworkers, and things like this, but especially officers, to let them know that if they're in not only shootings, but any kind of traumatic situation, they're not alone.
Mark, I'd like to say too that, for all your viewers, if there's a way you can get them my email,
You, you can do it
that they
right
could
now. Give them
always,
your email and have at it.
yeah. So my name is Brian Matthew Smith. So it's bmsmith778@gmail.com. bmsmith778@gmail.com. And you know what? I was writing articles called Californian Cop Tales, Tales. If you just look up, Google Californian with an N on the end, Cop Tales, there's a lot of stories that I put in there. Some are from other officers, a lot of them are my own stuff. But if you read those, it should also have my email on there if you want to send it. But you know what? Don't don't do this alone. I'm there. There's other people there. But hey, just a friendly email, right? I after writing the Cop Tales articles, I got quite a few emails from people, and I've made some good friends that way. I think I've helped people, and they help me. And so when it comes to the peer support, and also when you do debriefings, if you have feelings, go ahead and share them, because you might have somebody, you may think, I don't want to share my feelings, but you may have somebody in a group that has the same feelings as you, but they don't want to bring it out. So
Mm-hmm.
so bring out your feelings, and you'll be helping other people too. Um, and in a position for your department and they don't have a peer support, hey, I'll be more than happy to help. I know the Highway Patrol would be happy to help with their peer support unit up in Sacramento. We'll help out any agency, and I personally, and I'll tell you this about peer support: it has to be confidential. So anything you talk about, obviously, other than committing a crime, right? Um, then you know what, I'm always available, Mark, and I appreciate you doing this because you're reaching a lot of people that may need this help or even help other people. So
Well, Brian, I can vouch for you personally. I know you are a stand-up guy. You are a leader. You're a man of your word. And by the way, I'm going to say it too. You're a patriot, which means a lot to me. And I know that your offer of assistance to everybody listening. Again, this is family members too. It's not just the person that's
yeah,
involved. This is family members, loved ones. So anybody listening that has any kind of nexus or a need, involving something like this traumatic experience with law enforcement, please reach out to Brian. He means it sincerely when he's offering his help, his assistance, his time, and his vast insight. So, Brian Smith, God bless you. God bless you for what you survived, for what you've done, for what you've meant to the state of California, and what you continue to do in your current role in law enforcement. Your agency is very, very blessed and fortunate to have you. Thank you so much.
you
Ladies
bet.
and gentlemen, reach out to Brian. Make sure you keep subscribing, subscribe. Reach out to everybody about the show. This helps us to get people like Brian Smith on the show to talk about some of the most important things in the world of law enforcement and supporting the men and women who help to ensure a civil society. Thanks for watching. God bless you all. I'm Mark Garrett, the Chief, your Leo Nation, and we will see you next time.